Building and launching a no-code app and business as a non-technical entrepreneur can feel really, really complicated, but it doesn't have to. And today we're going to talk about our three-step process for going from idea to first pilot users. And we're going to deep dive into the first step of that phase so that you can get started really just simplifying your own process so you can actually launch your app and grow your business. Now, make sure you stick around until the end, because while we're going to do a deep dive on this first step, I'm also going to share a template and some extra training with you so that you can take it even further and continue forward with your app from there. Now, first, if you're new around here, my name is Kristen, and I'm the co-founder of Coaching No Code Apps, where we help non-technical entrepreneurs build custom apps so they can start their app-based businesses or grow their existing businesses all without coding. So we've been building and launching and helping entrepreneurs build and launch apps for years now. And the reason why it's so complicated is because as someone who has never built or launched an app before, everything you're doing is brand new. And it's not just one brand new thing that you're doing. There are lots of new things. You're figuring out how to plan your development, how to scope out your app, how to validate your app, how to validate your product, how to build your product, how to launch your product, how to do, all of the things. And so it can easily become overwhelming and way too complicated. When you take the business side and the tech side and you're diving into both of those, things can easily get messy. And so over the years, we have honed in on our own processes and simplified them so that it's a lot easier for entrepreneurs to go through the idea to launch process or path and come out on the other end successful. Now, we have three steps in our own process. Those are strategy, structure, systems. And when you have those three steps, then that leads you to the fourth at the very top, which is scale. So strategy, structure, and systems set up the foundation for a scalable app and business. So let's jump over to the whiteboard and we're going to dig into these. All right, on my screen here, you can see this model, and what we are going for with the three steps that we've talked about is your pilot launch. Okay, so we're going to put that at the very middle here. So those three steps, strategy, structure, and systems, lead to your pilot launch, and they set you up for a scalable app and business. So those three steps that we just talked about, we have right here, strategy. And then on the other side, we have structure. And we'll dive into these in just a second. And then right here, we have systems. Okay, so strategy, structure, and systems are all needed in order to create not only a scalable app, but the foundation for a scalable business on the other side. So the strategy piece is the very first thing that we start out with, because we want to make sure you have the right plan in place, that you have direction, that you have correct and achievable and realistic milestones and expectations too, because that can be one of the things that leads to a lot of complication, is when honestly you just don't know what to expect. And you have to have those realistic expectations, because if your expectations are way too high and you go into this process of building and launching an app and you realize that maybe there's a lot more involved than you thought, well, chances are you're going to lose a lot of momentum and it's going to be hard for you to ultimately launch. So we want to combat that right from the start. So when we think about strategy, what we're doing is essentially putting together an idea to users roadmap. Okay, so for example, when we take our own clients through the strategy step in our process, that's what they come out on the other end with, is an idea to users roadmap for their pilot launch, that section right in the middle. Okay, so that's what we want to look at for strategy. Then when we get to structure, what we want to start putting into place is the foundation of an application from a technical standpoint. So I make this comparison a lot, but I like to think about app development like you are building a house where you have to lay the foundation to put the house on top of, and then you have to build the frame of the house, and then you have to put in the wiring, and then you can hang the decorations and, put up the curtains and all that kind of stuff. So structure is where you start to lay that foundation. You start to build that framework. You start to build all the components that will house all the fancier, prettier, or more sleek pieces of the app, right? So with the structure step in the process, what we want is a foundation that scales. Okay, so if you think about this in terms of building a house, when you lay a foundation for a house, what if later on you want to add an extra room, or you want to build another level on top of that house? Well, you want the foundation to support that. You don't want to have to tear down the entire house in order to now go back and lay a more solid foundation so that you can rebuild the house, right? You don't want that. It's the same with your app. You want to build a foundation that is scalable. And that's where a lot of people run into problems, is they don't focus on that scalability. And this doesn't mean extra work. It means doing the right type of work from a technical standpoint. So leveraging no-code tools correctly, building your app correctly, using the right development strategies. So tool aside, are you approaching this with the right development mindset? So when our own clients go through this step in our process, they come out on the other end with a scalable foundation of their app so that they can grow, pivot, iterate their app long-term and feel comfortable and confident in moving forward and doing that. Okay, so that leads us to systems. Now, systems are where you put in the unique and custom logic. So going back to the comparison of building a house, if you think about having the foundation, you have the actual foundation, you have the walls, right? So you have the frame in place. Well, think about your unique and custom logic as things like wiring or plumbing. So if you walk into a room and there is a light switch on the wall to your left, and there is a light bulb in the ceiling, and you walk in and you say, okay, if I flip this switch, then I want that light to turn on. Well, what has to happen behind the scenes to make that work? Okay, well, that's your wiring in a house, right? There's wiring that goes through the walls and that connects the switch to the bulb and so on. Again, think about your app in the same way. Okay, if you have on the front end of your app, the user-facing side of your app, a button, and a user clicks this button, and you want something to happen behind the scenes so that something else happens for the user. Okay, so that's your unique and custom logic. Now, the features within apps are all mostly the same. There aren't a ton of just incredibly unique or revolutionary features, but what makes the features unique is how you apply them to your own use cases. And so in this system step, that's what happens. Okay, you want to come out on the other side with the knowledge, the skills, the capabilities that will enable you to create logic within your app. So just things that can happen behind the scenes that make your app unique and custom, because you're building an app so that there is a different solution available to yourself or to users, right? So it needs to be unique in some way, and that's what you want to focus on in this step. So once you have all three of these into place, that's what takes you to that next step, the scale, right? So strategy, structure, systems, and scale. But what I want to do now is deep dive into this strategy section, because until you have that in place, then nothing else matters. The structure can't happen, the systems can't happen, the scale can't happen. So strategy is the first thing that you need to focus on for the rest of the pieces to fall into place. And there are three parts within strategy that I want to cover with you so you can have an understanding of exactly how to set yourself up for both immediate and long-term success. Now, I do want to say the strategy step is less technical. And that makes sense, right? Naturally, it's going to be less technical. But even though it doesn't deal with the technical pieces of your app, it's incredibly important that you don't skip over this, because the technical stuff is not going to come together very well for you unless you have this in place. So the very first thing you need to make sure you have is a clear goal and milestones leading up to that goal. So what I'm going to do here is draw a little calendar. So it's very simple, but the first thing you need to do is set a pilot launch date. So that's a clear goal, and you want to have clear milestones leading up to that. So you want to have a defined time frame for your pilot app's development. That's the first version of your app, a defined time frame, a defined launch date, and you also want to have defined alpha users. Okay, ideally beta users as well. So when you have those things, what you're doing is putting structure in place. And one of the hardest things about building and launching an app, a business, really any type of business, is a lack of structure when you're doing it on your own. When there's no structure, it is really easy to veer off track. I've seen it hundreds and hundreds of times where there's just no structure. And so you kind of just go with the flow. But when you are going with the flow, you run into really extended development timeframes, delayed launches. I'm talking a year or more, and it's just not necessary. You don't need to do that. You can and should launch your pilot app within 3 months of starting your development. It should be that short, and you should have users on board by the end of that. It should not go any longer than that. And you have to have structure in place in order to do that. So come up with your goal date for your pilot launch, okay? And come up with certain milestones to get you to that goal date. That means having a set scope. That means having your users already defined. For example, with our own clients, we are their alpha testers. And so that makes it really easy for them to have those initial pilot test users already defined, and they can start looking at their beta test users after that. And you should do things like that as well. You should start finding the people. You should set the goals, set the milestones so that the structure is there. It will make a world of difference for you. Okay, so the next thing that you need is a defined roadmap. Okay, so we're gonna let's have a little map here. Okay, that's our roadmap. You need to have a defined roadmap which lays out your now features and your later features. So this just builds on top of what we were just talking about, right? Making sure you have the right scope of your app in order to hit the milestones and the goal that you've set for yourself. So those now and later features will help determine what is going to get you to the goals and milestones. You need to make sure that you're building your must-have features. These are the features that must be in place in order to test your app. And you need to make sure you're sticking to the value-based features. So there are features that are must-haves, there are features that are nice-to-haves, and there are features that go beyond those that should not even come into play until many later versions. So one of the things we do with some of our own clients is set them up with what we call feedback filters. So this is like a scoring system where you take your initial features through a set of questions and you score them. That helps determine whether they are now features or later features. And then once you bring those pilot users on board and you start getting feedback for iterations or other features, you take those feedback pieces and you put them through another filter to determine whether those are now iterations or additions or later iterations or additions. And so this all comes together to form a roadmap. Okay, you have to have a roadmap. Again, going back to structure, you can have a destination in mind. You can see it in your mind, you can feel it, you can smell it, you can taste it, whatever. But if you don't have directions on how you're going to get there, you'll never get there. You just won't, right? You can come up with a destination on a map, but if you don't have the driving directions to get you there, you won't get there. Or maybe you will, but it's going to take you a lot longer than it should, right? And we don't want that. So you want to make sure that you are putting your features through filters, making sure that you're focusing on them from a strategic perspective versus a gut perspective. Your gut can be helpful, but there's a lot of strategy that should come into play. Now, we're going to dive deeper into this a little bit later. We have an extended training on this that'll help you put together your own roadmap. So we'll come back to that. But the last thing that I want to talk about with the strategy section is accountability. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is attempt to draw two people fist bumping. That's what that looks like, right? So you need accountability in place. Now, this is like the farthest from the technical components that you can get. So bear with me here. But without any accountability in place, you're going to have a hard time moving forward. Now, obviously, when we're working directly with people, we act as a lot of accountability, and we build in accountability in a lot of different ways. But you can build in your own accountability in a lot of different ways as well. So easy things you can do. Well, number one, share that launch date. Share it with people. Share it with people outside of your friends and your family as well. Ideally, share it with your prospective users so that you can start lining them up so they're waiting at the door, so that when your pilot app is ready, they can immediately come on board, right? So share that, and share your intentions. Share your intentions with your friends and your family. Share your intentions for the time that you're going to be spending on your app. Maybe you're not going to be able to go out with friends on weekends like you normally would, or maybe you're going to have to step away in the evenings, or maybe your spouse is going to have to help you with some of the things that you normally do on a day-to-day basis for the family for an extended period of time. Share that because then people can support you, and that's really important. It creates accountability. One thing that I like to remind people is, if you're not talking about your app, nobody will. Okay. And when you talk about your app, a lot of things happen. You do get people interested. I mean, that's one obvious benefit. You get prospective users interested. You get potential partners interested, but you also get yourself excited, and you create accountability for yourself, because once it's out there, you can take it back, but you're probably not going to want to. Okay. And it can be scary to put it out there. It can be scary to talk about a launch when you haven't finished the product yet. It can be scary to set your intentions when you're not sure whether you'll succeed because it's something you've never done before. Those things can be scary and intimidating, but the more you talk about it, the more momentum you're going to build for yourself. And that will drive you towards success if you continue doing that. It's when you pull back and you hide away that those development timeframes that extend and the launches just never happen. And I've seen it happen way too many times. And so again, while this might sound like the least technical thing to be talking about, it's just so important. So you want to have your clear goals and milestones. Okay, if you don't have those, you have no structure and you have no starting point. You want to have a roadmap in place to build on top of those. You can have the destination, but without the roadmap to take you there, you're either not going to get there ever, or it's going to take you a really, really long time, and you don't want that. And you have to have the accountability in place. Set your intentions, share your launch goal, talk about your app. If you're not talking about your app, nobody will. Nobody will. That's the truth. So when you have those three things, then you're going to have the strategy laid for your app, that strategy step. That can take you to structure. That can take you to systems. And when you have all three, then you have your pilot launch and you have a scalable foundation for your app and for your business. Now, looking back at this strategy section and at your roadmap, how do you create that? Because there's a lot of unknowns in there, and it's one of the most important pieces. So we have a free extended training over at coachingnocodeapps.com/perfect-pilot. So perfect-pilot. That's going to help you create your roadmap. That's going to help you determine those now and later features. And you have to have those in order to hit that goal date and milestone. Okay, you have to have those defined. You have to have the roadmap. That's going to lay the foundation, and that's going to be your launching pad for ongoing longer term success. So head to coachingnocodeapps.com/perfect-pilot, grab that template, grab the extended training, and dive further into this from there. All right. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you found this helpful, and we'll see you in the next one.